Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we've got a pretty intense topic to dive into, one that's bound to spark some strong opinions. We're going to talk about the 5 guns that, in my view, and supported by a lot of facts, are often overhyped. These are firearms that have developed an almost legendary status among gun enthusiasts. But when you really break them down, they're just not as impressive as their fan base believes. We're not saying these guns are bad, but rather that they don't live up to the high expectations set by their cult-like following. Next up, at number 5, brace yourselves, I'm going to talk about the Thompson Submachine Gun. This is one of my all-time favorites, a firearm that's as iconic as they come. I've spent a lot of money shooting Thompsons at events, and I even own one myself. It's one of those guns that just looks undeniably cool. And let's face it, its history adds a lot to its appeal. If you're American, you probably know it's closely tied to World War II, and it continued to see use in later conflicts long after that. However, despite its cool factor, the Thompson is far from a perfect weapon. It was one of the first submachine guns to gain widespread success, but that doesn't mean it's without its flaws, especially when compared to more modern designs. It's a great-looking weapon, no doubt, and it definitely played a role in bridging the gap between older weapons like the 1911 and rifles like the Garand. But it wasn't a perfect transition. The Thompson's age and its design limitations show when you compare it to more contemporary submachine guns that perform better in many key areas. So while I get the nostalgia and the admiration for its place in history, the Thompson is another example of a gun that's been over-idealized. Alright, let's talk about the downsides of the Thompson. First off, it's incredibly heavy, one of the heaviest submachine guns you'll ever hold. This thing is of all-metal construction, making it super durable, but also making it a beast to carry. The production process back in the day was expensive and time-consuming, and even if you're looking at one of the modern recreations, you're still going to pay a hefty price for it. Next, when it comes to performance, the range is pretty limited for a .45 caliber pistol caliber carbine or submachine gun. The drum magazines are notoriously unreliable, and most users stick with stick mags, which only hold 20 rounds, a pretty small capacity, especially when you're shooting fast. Those 20 rounds go quickly, trust me. Another thing I'm not a fan of is its weight. This thing is heavier than a Garand. And let's be real, a Garand shoots a powerful 30 round at semi-auto speed, so it's got way more capability than the Thompson. Sure, the Thompson is better in close quarters, but the Garand outperforms it in almost every other area. For the same weight, that's kind of a tough pill to swallow. As for handling, compared to other submachine guns from its era, like the MP40, or the PPSH, the Thompson is harder to control. It's not because the .45 ACP is an insane round, but rather due to how the stock connects to the gun. The low riding stock makes the gun tend to ride high when you fire, which affects its controllability. Personally, I find the PPSH and MP40 much easier to keep on target during rapid fire. Then there's the issue with modern recreations. They're notoriously unreliable. If you buy one of these, you're likely to run into problems from the get-go. I've never met anyone who hasn't had issues with one, and you might find yourself dealing with jammed rounds or misfeeds right out of the box. It's not the end of the world, but it's definitely not ideal. Now, don't get me wrong. The Thompson isn't a bad gun. It's still usable and has taken down its fair share of bad guys throughout history. If you're okay with a low round capacity, somewhat sketchy reliability, and the weight of a tank, and you're in it for the cool factor and the American history, then by all means, go for it. But at the end of the day, it's pretty clear it's overrated. At number 4, let's talk about big bore revolvers. This is a classic case of people falling for the idea that bigger is always better. You'll hear folks say things like, I'm going to buy a Smith & Wesson 500, a 460, or a 44 Magnum to protect my home, thinking that the sheer stopping power of these guns will guarantee safety. But what people often forget is that stopping power isn't the only thing that matters. In fact, there are a lot of hidden downsides to these big bore revolvers that you only realize once you take them to the range. For starters, the sheer size of these guns makes them difficult to handle, especially in tight spaces. Imagine trying to clear a corner with a gun that has a long barrel. There's a lot of guns sticking out, which can make it hard to retain. Another thing people don't realize is how incredibly loud they are indoors. The bigger the revolver, the more bang you'll feel and hear. It might seem fun at first, but trust me, it gets old fast. These guns require a lot of training to use effectively. First, there's the recoil. Big bore revolvers hit hard, and managing that recoil can be a real challenge. But the recoil isn't the only issue. The trigger mechanism also demands a lot of practice. Unlike a striker-fired gun, which typically has a short, light trigger pull, a double-action revolver often has a much heavier and longer pull. You might be looking at anywhere from 6 to 10 pounds of force to pull the trigger, and the long distance you have to pull it can cause you to lose sight alignment, especially if you're new to the gun. Most people are used to a 5-pound trigger that only goes back a short distance. With a revolver, it's like pulling a brick. Sure, you can drop the hammer into single action mode, which makes it more accurate. But let's be real, you probably won't have time to do that in a high-stress situation. Plus, with a revolver, you're limited to 6 rounds. So while it may be powerful, you're also going to be at a disadvantage in terms of capacity compared to something like a Glock 19 with 15 or 17 rounds. On top of that, these revolvers are heavy and hard to conceal, making them less than ideal for people who don't have a lot of upper body strength, or those who want something easy to carry all day. If you're a smaller person, you'll find it challenging to control the recoil and get quick follow-up shots. Carrying one of these big guns is also uncomfortable, and don't even get me started on the folks who buy these 44 Magnums for concealed carry. That's just asking for trouble. Not only is it impractical, but it's also a massive attention grabber. Plus, it's just way too heavy for all-day carry. Big bore revolvers can also be pretty expensive. While a Taurus raging hunter might be somewhat affordable, you're still looking at a hefty price tag, around $1,000. And then there's the cost of the ammunition, which will absolutely drain your wallet. Now, yes, if you land a good shot, these revolvers pack a serious punch, and with enough practice, they can be very effective. But that's the key, practice. Most people who own these guns won't put in the time or money to become proficient with them, which is why they're often overrated. In summary, big bore revolvers are cool, but they're only effective if you dedicate yourself to mastering them. The reality is, most people won't put in the time, and that's what makes them overrated because, despite their performance potential, they often sit in a drawer, rarely used. So, unless you're committed to serious practice, don't buy one expecting it to be a magic solution to all your problems. At number 3, we have the Desert Eagle, a gun that's iconic, especially in movies and video games. Honestly, it's probably one of the coolest looking pistols out there, and I own one myself. But here's the thing, the Desert Eagle is overrated. If you're just a casual gun fan, watching action films or playing games, you might think this is the ultimate handgun. But after owning one and using it, I can tell you it's not as amazing as the hype suggests. The first issue is reliability. I've had a few Desert Eagles, and they're notorious for having reliability problems, especially when compared to cheaper, more reliable guns like the PDP, Glock 19, or M and P. These guns tend to run smoothly out of the box, but Desert Eagles, especially in the bigger calibers like the 50 caliber Auto Express, have some performance quirks. It's fun to shoot, sure, but it's not always dependable, especially when compared to a simple revolver or something like a Glock. Then there's the size. This thing is huge, and I'm a big guy. Even with this smaller version chambered in .357 Magnum, it's still a heavy, bulky pistol about 50 ounces unloaded, which is massive compared to other handguns. It's certainly not ideal for carry way too big and heavy for practical use. As for capacity, you only get 9+1 rounds with the .357 Magnum, which is not impressive at all, especially considering how large the gun is. For reference, I have 8-round revolvers that are just as reliable, if not more so, and much easier to handle. Another downside is that, while it's accurate, it's hard to add useful accessories. You can put a red dot sight on it, but there's no place for a light, which limits its utility for things like home defense. Plus, magazines are extremely expensive, which makes the Desert Eagle an even bigger financial commitment. To sum it up, the Desert Eagle is a fun gun to shoot, but it's not practical for self-defense or everyday use. The size, weight, capacity, and reliability all work against it in real-world situations. If you want something for self-defense, you'd be better off with a more practical gun like a Glock 19 or something similar. The Desert Eagle is best suited for someone who just loves having a cool, big-bore gun, not for someone who needs a reliable, everyday carry pistol. At number 2, we have the Glock pistol. This one stings a little to say because I recognize the importance of the Glock in the world of firearms. But it's definitely overrated in today's world. The Glock is one of the most, if not the most, popular pistols ever created. It pretty much created an entire genre of pistols that many others have tried to replicate, and it deserves credit for that. But here's the thing, it's getting a little outdated, especially when compared to its peers in 2023. One of the main reasons the Glock is overrated is its failure to innovate. Sure, they've made some updates like the 19X or the Gen 5, but the truth is, they still look very similar to Gen 1S and 2S. The design hasn't evolved much, and they still have the same subpar trigger and basic sights that have been there since the beginning. The white box sights that come on most Glocks are terrible, and while the military version of the 19X comes with better sights, the rest of the Glocks on the market are still stuck with the same old basic ones. The grip on the Glock is also starting to feel outdated. While most modern pistols have adapted to a more ergonomic, American-style grip, the Glock still forces you to break your wrist to get a proper sight picture. If you're used to shooting a variety of guns, this can be a problem because it can cause you to aim high on your first presentation, which is not ideal, especially in self-defense scenarios. As I mentioned earlier, the trigger on a Glock is pretty heavy, and the reset is long, making it harder to perform fast strings of fire compared to guns like the PDP, Koenig, VP9, or CZP10. Sure, you can upgrade the trigger, sights, and optics, but those upgrades cost extra. So if you're already spending $500 to $700 on a Glock, adding those upgrades means you could be looking at a total price point closer to $1,000, and by then, you could have gone with an M and P or CZ that are both priced much lower and perform just as well. I hate to say it, but Glock's reliability has been slipping in recent years. I've had a Glock 19 that had 2 malfunctions in the first 100 rounds and 4 malfunctions in the first 500 rounds. This is particularly disappointing because the Glock has built its reputation on reliability. When I can buy a $400 Koenig that performs just as well, better trigger, and all without any reliability issues, it makes it hard to justify the price of the Glock. While I respect the Glock for what it's done for the gun and pistol community, in 2023, it's definitely overrated. The Glock's lack of innovation, heavy trigger, outdated grip design, and reliability issues make it hard to justify when there are better and more affordable options available on the market today. At number 1, we have the Sig P320, and honestly, I couldn't place it anywhere else. I'm aware that I'm gaining some internet fame for criticizing this gun, but it truly deserves this spot. There was no shortage of comments on my Twitter post about the P320, with hundreds of people agreeing that it's overrated. So I know I'm not alone in this opinion. Although I did feature it on my most overrated pistols list, it's not all bad, and the P320 does have its merits. So let's dive into that. The P320 is known for its modularity and was adopted as the M17 and 18 for the U.S. military's modular handgun system contract, beating out other guns like the Glock for the military's approval. The P320's modularity is impressive, allowing for different grip sizes, barrel lengths, and configurations, which is a huge benefit, especially if you live in a state with restrictions. However, the platform has had some serious downsides. First, the high bore axis and chunky slide make the P320 harder to shoot quickly and accurately, leading to a heavier recoil impulse than you would get with other guns like the CZ-P10C or PDP. Also, in my experience, reliability has been a major issue with almost every P320 I've tried, including the Legion model. Despite its solid reputation, many of these pistols have malfunctioned, and it's frustrating when a gun with such a huge following doesn't deliver on reliability. Another major problem with the P320 is the drop fire issue. Although I've never personally experienced a drop fire incident, there have been numerous reports from credible sources that have replicated the issue. This raises serious concerns because there are plenty of other models available that don't have this problem, and I'd rather not risk having a gun accidentally discharged, especially in an intense situation. The M17 and 18 versions of the P320 are similar in design, with slightly different barrel lengths and configurations. While the M17 has a 4.7-inch barrel and the M18 has a 4-inch barrel, both models have a capacity of 17 to 20 rounds, and they accept larger magazines as well. The military versions have safeties, while the civilian versions don't. Though the P320 comes with a rail and an OK trigger, the overall design can be frustrating for mounting optics, especially if you're trying to mount a non-Sig optic like a Trijicon. Ultimately, the P320's drop fire issues, reliability concerns, and high bore axis make it a solid gun in theory, but overrated in practice. It's good enough for personal defense, but it certainly doesn't live up to its hype. And that's why it takes the top spot as the most overrated gun. Given the amount of votes I received and the fact that it topped my personal list, I had no choice but to rank it number 1. While I'm sure some people will still swear by it, I believe most will agree that the P320 has some serious shortcomings. This is my list of overrated guns, and of course it's subjective. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, or if you disagree, feel free to share your own overrated gun list.